Hi, this is Shelby from Turn Sounds. It's easier to find a cucumber in a paddock than a needle in a haystack.
Hey, I'm Abby, a clinical nutritionist.
And I'm Shelby, a clinical exercise physiologist, and this is the Move Your Mind podcast.
We are sick and tired of people being led astray by false information about diet and exercise.
So join us as we discuss common misconceptions about food and fitness with the latest scientific research.
Let's get into it.
Howdy. Hello. How you doing, Abby?
Great.
Good.
I'm ready to listen.
Ready to listen. We are talking, talking about BMI today, body mass index, and whether I like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then following on just a chat about body composition in different ways that we can measure and kind of track progress with what's changing in our body in regards to fat and muscle and bits and pieces like that.
I like that.
Yeah.
Because it's nice to see progress, isn't it?
Exactly.
And I'm hoping that you'll talk about things other than numbers.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Most of it is number driven because it's like what's being used, but absolutely it comes into play different ways. Because we all like an objective measure, and I know people like that and they kind of seek that. So we're going to talk about all the ones that are out there and what I use and what you should use and what you should stay away from and all that kind of stuff.
Cool.
So we're going to kick it off with body mass index, BMI, because it's very popular.
Very.
And I hear people refer to it all the time. So your body mass index is a calculation that we might use, which is based on your weight divided by your height squared.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's all the information that goes into that calculation is your weight and your height. So already like alarm bells.
Red flags.
just to say that a minute 43 or not even because we talked
Yeah, what did we discuss,
less than
Shelby?
a minute.
Don't give away
I'm holding
the
up,
answers.
I'm giving out I'm probing the way. So it's supposed to be a measure of obesity. So it's so body mass index, it's trying to tell us what your body mass has to do with health.
Yes.
Is what this calculation is trying to tell us. It's really, really simple to use. Like, how easy is that information to get? So easy to get height and weight. So easy to do that calculation. It's cheap. It's really, really quick. So from a research and data collection point of view, it's a really handy calculation to have because it doesn't cost any money to do. And we can do it on bulk, which is also, I'll put a little like red flag, just like flag that information as well.
Yeah.
So it was developed in 1832
You're kidding.
by a mathematician in order to help governments decide where to allocate their health and financial resources. So it's trying to be a measure of obesity. Next line. Obesity is a measurement of health. If you're obese, which means you have more fat mass, you are more than likely at higher risk of chronic disease.
Yes.
I am in agreement with that statement. That statement sets, that's fine. So what we're then trying to do is see if there are more obese people in this corner of your land, you probably need to spend more money on health resources for them, vice versa.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
It does, totally.
So that kind of like statement, absolutely agree with. And so what we know, even from the guy who created this, is what he was looking at populations of people. This was designed to see an overall trend of obesity, hint, hint, rather than that of one individual. Yeah? So already we're kind of seeing the original purpose of this calculation versus what's used for today, which is an individual person's measure of health. Not even just obesity, usually it's taken as status. Health. Yes.
Yeah.
Which can be.
Oh, yes.
So, very, very useful to know if you are obese or overweight. I agree that we can know that and that can form part of our opinion on your health status because carrying extra fat mass, which is what makes you overweight, can have negative impacts on your health. Typically, what we think about with these things is your heart health. So your heart typically doesn't run as well if it's surrounded by fat, lots of fat. And same thing goes with your organs. If your organs are coated in fat, probably they're not working as well. Like,
And
so that's
under more pressure as well, given the lifestyle and dietary habits that you'd be engaging with to be obese.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So that's kind of like the premise behind even having this calculation in the first place, is we want to know. It is helpful to know that kind of health status. Then my question I put to you is, does BMI actually measure that? You know what I mean?
Well, when you were saying you agree with it's a measure of obesity, I agree it can be.
Yes, but even that we're going to discuss today, because your weight is not all fat.
No.
So
Yes,
that's
yes,
exactly
yes,
my
yes.
next point. So yes, we know obesity is being fat. Having more fat mass than is healthy, in quotation marks.
Yeah.
But the issue with BMI is it only factors in weight. And weight is not fat. We are not
There's a
just
lot
blobs
more
of
than
fat.
that.
So we've mentioned it before, we have a whole bunch of lean body mass, which can actually make up to 70 to 90% of your weight.
Whoa.
So of your weight,
Yeah.
if we take that like conservatively, 70% of your weight is not fat, just like from a generic standpoint.
Yeah.
It's muscle, it's organs, it's skin, it's water, it's bone, it's everything else. So straight off, you're giving me this weight number and telling me it's a measure of my fat, when straight off 70% of that isn't even fat.
Because the initial goal was to measure obesity.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So like, just like straight up, number one to factor in is that our weight is made up of more than fat.
Yes.
And so you have to factor that in when you're trying to find someone's health status from just their body composition, taking out everything else, mental and psychological and health and stuff
Because if
like that.
they're 90% lean and they have a higher weight, you're saying, given BMI, you're like, you're at risk of all the chronic diseases
Exactly.
associated with obesity, which is actually high fat mass, but you don't have high fat mass.
Exactly.
Ah.
So different tissue types play different roles in our body. We have fat for a reason. We have muscle for a reason. We have organs for a reason. So it's really important. It's really important to give these functions the kind of importance that they need and require, and kind of validate their position in our bodies and why we need them, right? And so we also know that different tissue types have different metabolic rates. So not all tissue is the same in regards to its energy use and how kind of beneficial it is to have around.
Definitely.
So, and then this composition, which is what we're kind of talking about. So in how much what's the ratio of fat to muscle is something we're quite interested in usually in these types of things. So having more muscle means usually you're burning a little bit more at rest. It means that your bones are better supported. It means that your cardiovascular system is probably more efficient because muscle is really high in, what's the powerhouse called? Mitochondria and things like that. So that kind of alludes to a different health status than if you had lots of fat that isn't as beneficial
and
to
it's
the...
not really involved in energy production or utilization. It's storage.
Just a little storage pouch, yeah.
Yeah.
So really important. And then if we start to think holistically, the difference on the impact on your endocrine system. So so the muscles effect on your hormones versus fat's effect on your hormones, right? So then we can start to like broaden this picture out and out and out and out, and just start to realize how important body composition is versus body weight.
Yes, and body mass index.
Yes. Which only measures weight. BMI cannot distinguish between muscle and fat. It just can't, which is where some of the really big issues come in. So everyone's probably heard that muscle weighs more than fat. It's a denser tissue. Yeah. So while 1 kilo of muscle equals 1 kilo of fat, like each at 1 kilo.
The size.
Yeah, the size and how much room they take up. It's denser, muscle is.
Yeah.
So if you have lots of muscle, you will weigh more than someone who doesn't have a lot of muscle, right? So if we're only looking at your weight will be higher, even though you're really, really strong and fit and have all this muscle. But in a BMI calculation, a higher weight leads to a higher obesity category.
Yes.
That makes
yes.
sense? Yeah. So you can already see where that can really easily fall down if you are quite fit. There's something else in that equation, height. If you're really short, that's going to make your weight seem way further out of proportion to your height. And you will typically be called obese if you are shorter.
Gymnasts
even if you
would
are.
most
Yes,
definitely be
yes.
put in
So
the
they
obese
have both
category.
sides. So weight is up because they have lots of really dense muscle.
Yeah.
And their height is down. So the equation just flips to like calling them obese, which is just so not true if you just opened your eyes and looked at them.
Yes. Wow.
Right?
What do you know? We can actually look at people.
But what happens is instead of using this as, like a population idea of just like a really like squinting at what's going on in a population, it's being used as like everything an individual person has to offer.
I'm just imagining, like, you know, when you go on Google Maps and you keep going minus, zoom out. BMI should be like...
The whole world, the whole galaxy.
Yeah, literally. You can see all the planets.
Absolutely.
Not just Earth. And it's kind of being used for, let's Google my address and look at my house.
Absolutely. So BMI is way less specific. It doesn't tell you much about health. It doesn't factor in the difference between lean body mass and fat mass. It also doesn't take into other risk factors for chronic disease. So if what we're trying to find out is your risk for chronic disease, it's not factoring in age or ethnicity or if you smoke or if you consume alcohol or any of those factors that, some of them are modifiable, some of them aren't modifiable. So it's not factoring in anything like that. And it's not taking into consideration that they probably have more to do with what's going on than your weight.
Because I do recall, though, there's, for Asian populations, there's different numbers, like their categories are within different parameters, right?
Yeah, so Asian men and women have a higher risk of heart disease at a lower BMI compared to non-Asian. So their categories of BMI are skewed, which is good. They should use a different category set, so different like value cutoffs for if you're Asian versus if you're not. So whether that's even happening when our GP or whoever it is calculates our BMI for us. So whether that's even being factored in when it should be is another thing. So so then it just all starts falling apart for me very, 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 very quickly.
Yeah, fell apart from minute 142, whatever it was.
True.
It's already fallen apart.
So it's a very oversimplified measure of obesity, one, that is then being assumed to be health measurement, number two. And it can very easily miss the point, like we said. If you are very muscular, you will be obese. If you are very short, you will be obese. But also the other way, we all know that person who's like not very active, they don't weigh much, but they don't have much muscle mass on them either. So that person will be missed. That person will be put as healthy category when really they don't have much muscle and they have a lot of fat mass. So then it can miss the other side of it as well. So then a person who really needs attention from a health perspective, who is at a higher risk of chronic disease because of that composition being out, they are missed because they will come up as healthy in this calculation.
Get out of jail free card. Yeah. I just think about, anorexia recovery, right? Because there's all this push to get over the BMI that you need to. Once you're over that BMI, then you're good.
Because low bone mass comes into it as well. Like if you have really brittle bones that don't weigh much, that's not good. But it's also going to keep your weight down, which in the eyes of BMI is good.
Yes.
Which is not.
Yes. It's so damaging. And then the behaviours that come with just wanting to get back to BMI when BMI is actually not a measure of health.
Absolutely.
And it shouldn't be used as a measure of health. And
I'm trying to show you how those jumps have been made to where BMI equals health. And there are just so many broken links in that.
Yeah. Most definitely.
Absolutely. So, BMI should be used very sparingly, if at all. And never, ever on its own. Never, ever, ever, ever on its own. So I still put BMI in my like GP letters because I feel like it's something they can relate to. but it's never on its own. I always will then put in something else that I'm going to talk about that either supports my overall vibe.
Yes, my vibe.
Or throws BMI out of the window, where I can say, look, BMI said this, but A, B, and C means they're actually quite healthy.
Yes.
So I justify with other things.
For sure.
Cool. So
what are these other things?
So a quick actually point before I dismiss it completely. There are links between higher BMIs and health risk. Like, there is a correlation there, because most of the time, if you weigh a lot, it'll be fat mass. Like, in today's society, where we are overweight,
very true,
that is the majority situation.
Yeah.
So it does have a place, because if you are underweight or obese on BMI, you are at a higher risk of chronic disease. But again, we're talking about the extremes of each one, where you're not missed in the middle of what's kind of going on.
Yeah.
And again, if you just open your eyes and look at the person, you'll also be able to see whether is this obese category correct for that person, or is it missing the point? Are they tall and muscular?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's where like common sense comes in. So I just wanted to add that in, that there are correlations between health risk and BMI.
Yeah. Because if, in some aspects you will have an BMI in the obese category, and you wouldn't want someone to go,
it doesn't mean anything.
Shelby said I'm fine.
No.
There are some correlations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because in today's society, probably higher weight means more fat.
I would.
More so the case than really big muscle mass.
Yes, because obesity rates have risen by quite a substantial amount, and we're going for more of a sedentary convenience lifestyle, so that would equate to more of a low energy expenditure, low muscle mass. So that's
Correct.
A pretty fair comment.
But not to be, again, still not to be taken by itself. So then what else do we have? Right? So we've just got a few things to run through. So if we go from the cheap and quick side first, so BMI, cheap and quick, my next go-to is a waist to hip ratio. I think it's really beneficial. So you measure the smallest bit of your waist, which is usually a couple centimetres above your belly button, and you measure the widest bit of your hips, which is kind of like mid-butt, mid-glutes kind of thing. And the ratio of those two can mean something. And this is trying to tell us about your level of visceral fat. So it's trying to tell us how much fat you hold around your midsection, which can then be taken a step further till we can probably assume that is fat around your organs. So that's where the word visceral fat comes in. And fat around your organs is not good.
Yeah.
So that kind of like end premise is like infallible, like we know that. We're just trying to find a quick and convenient way to measure that.
Yes.
So it's pretty good. I do use it. There are some like cutoff points, and there are some like there's a ratio that we're looking for, that over means just increased risk and under means not as much risk.
Yes.
So it's still not as definitive as BMI necessarily. It just kind of goes, you probably are at a higher risk of this, because it understands that even just having a big waist doesn't mean anything.
No.
Like, measure my belly right now.
Pregnancy.
And it's going to say, but that's the thing. Like, you can't be blind when you're making these measurements. You have to look at the person still, because my belly is big and it's going to tell me that I have all this visceral fat and really just a baby hanging out.
That's actually, that's quite true. I've always been not bigger waisted, but for my level of visceral fat that I know I have through other methods that are probably a bit more expensive, I'm definitely not of high risk.
So if you have a really tiny butt, your butt will not be bigger than your waist, and so the ratio will be higher to 1, where they're equal, and that's not good.
And if you have a wider waist through literally things like width of obliques, like that's definitely my case.
Yes.
And
just different body types.
Yeah.
Then it's going to throw it out as well.
So more
still
rectangular, your hourglass,
exactly, that whole like pear and apple shape and things like that. You still have to take into account, because you can have a much smaller waist than hips and be in an unhealthy state.
And it's like also, where is your body more prone to storing fat as well? Some people hold all their junk in their trunk,
Exactly.
And then they're going to be of
which
low
will
risk.
Put their ratio in something that looks really good on paper, because their waist is quite small compared to their hips. But again, so then third step is you just use waist circumference on its own as well. So you can do the waist to hip ratio, which is obviously the ratio between your waist and your hip, but waist circumference on its own, which is really kind of the step before because you have to measure it by itself, that has something to do with health risk as well, chronic disease risk. So that can also be used. And these are all really cheap. You can do all those 3 measurements in like 30 seconds with a tape measure. Your skill as a technician isn't that necessary. Anyone can kind of do a tape measure. You know, like it's not that hard. So from that kind of perspective, it is a good one to use. And an increased waist circumference is linked to a negative impact on heart health because of its associations with visceral fat. Yeah. Which, like we said, from a more holistic view, is doing weird things to hormones, it's doing weird things to cardiovascular efficiency, it's doing weird things to bone health and things like that.
You always go back to the behaviours as well.
Absolutely.
Which would promote that.
Exactly. And I'm still keeping that quite small at just kind of looking at physiology, not even looking at anything else. Yeah, absolutely. So then we can go even, so obviously we can then go even more expensive. Now it just gets more expensive, or the need to be highly skilled comes into play. So we've all probably heard of skin folds as well. Yes. So still very cheap. The calipers are really, really cheap, but you actually need to be very skilled and practiced as a technician to get any kind of validity across and reliability across the measurements.
Have you trained in that?
I did.
Yeah.
But 4 years ago, one lab at uni, haven't done it since. So I could be good at it, but I didn't value it enough to keep practicing. And who likes having their bits squished?
I know.
It's a horrible experience.
I would not want my...
It takes quite a long time to do. And then also what this one is doing is it's making an assumption about your subcutaneous fat and linking it to visceral fat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's now... So if you pinch your skin... And then like the amount that's in between your fingers, that measurement is measured. Yeah. And that thickness is supposed to mean something about your fat levels.
So is it like higher, greater number, higher amount of subcutaneous, higher amount of visceral? Is that the correlation?
Yes. Yeah. And so like number 1 rule is you can't do 2 measurements too quickly together because you've squeezed out some of the water. The pinch. So your second measurement will be smaller because you've already squeezed out some of the stuff that's in your tissues just by pinching it.
Squeeze out stuff.
Yeah, like it kind of just oozes into the cells next door and out of the kind of interstitial space.
I'm just squeezing my arm really intensely right now for anyone that's not watching and listening.
So even if you do 2 measurements too quickly... So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to pinch and then rub the area to like get everything back in place and then pinch it.
Go back, guys.
So like already, and I don't know, I didn't necessarily look into it for this, but I don't know about that jump from subcutaneous fat to visceral fat either. I don't know what correlations they have, but still it's an assumption being made.
Yes.
Then we can go up the line. Probably next is kind of your bioimpedance analysis, which we use at our gym. You stand on like a plate and you hold some things and a little electrical current goes through your body. You can't feel it, but it's based on the idea that how fast that current runs through your body, mostly like the water. So it'll move at a different rate through muscle than it will through fat.
Because of the density.
Absolutely. Yep, and the amount of water that's stored in there. So the time it takes to reach A to B, they are then assuming, again from water, they're assuming fat.
Because there are a lot of rules around BIA collection, like how long ago did you work out? How long ago did you drink? Are you hydrated?
How long ago did you pee?
Pee?
Yeah.
Because it's all, it's all based on water and the electrical current.
Yes. Yeah, so there are, like, again, so that's, you can get those machines for relatively cheap. The more you spend on the machine, the more accurate it's going to be because the calculations are a bit more in depth, but it's still an assumption. So none of these I would be taking by themselves as a measure, right?
Yeah.
So we use the BIA because it is very quick. once you've bought the machine, there's no upkeep, so it's cheap from that kind of perspective. But I will always tell people, so we do like a monthly measurement to gauge a trend.
Yeah.
And all it ever is supporting evidence for everything else you're telling me. Like, I feel better, I'm stronger, or I'm feeling lethargic, I'm feeling squishy, whatever it is. Yeah. Then I just use whatever the scan tells me as supporting evidence for their story. So I usually do it right at the end and go, none of this is new information, because you've already told me you want to lose some fat. You already told me you want to tone up a little bit. You already told me that whatever, you don't feel strong. So then that aligns with a low muscle mass, high fat mass result on the scan. You see what I'm saying?
Definitely.
So I never make my decisions from that. I make the scan kind of fit my already holistic idea of what's going on.
And it's nice that it's a month apart too, because you kind of, get that long-term trend rather than hyper-focusing on this week was a bad week.
Even month to month, I'm like, eh. Like people's weight will go down like 200 grams or go up 200 grams. I'm like, 200 grams over a month is not
just
good.
Just go to the toilet.
And then we look down and see that there's been a kilo shift in muscle mass and fat mass. And I go, look at that.
Yeah.
And that's supported by you being consistent in the gym, you being consistent with your diet, you getting stronger, you feeling better, your clothes fitting differently. All of that means way more to me than whatever this scan's going to tell you.
And often, yes, it will mean way more to the client as well. Yes. Because by doing those behaviours, they're going to feel a lot better about themselves and realise that's what they want.
And talk about learning for long-term change. That stuff's way more important.
Yes, for sure.
Worth mentioning is hydrostatic weighing and like air displacement and stuff. I learnt about them at uni, but you will never come across them in the general public.
Aren't there those like chambers and you just like float in water?
So like there's an upright or like a shower that's like sealed, full of water, right, up to like this level. And we know that like if you went into that water, the water level would rise.
Displacement.
So how much you displace that amount of water means something. I can't remember.
Who decided that they needed that? Who needs that?
And then the same with the air. Like if you're in like a chamber and then you go into it, the difference in the air displacement means something to do with your body. I don't know.
It just makes me like, okay. Who needs that?
So that one, I doubt you'll ever come across. We learnt about it from a sports science perspective, and only like sports science labs would ever have anything like that.
Would it be for elite athletes? Is that the population?
Yeah, but even then you'd probably have different ways of measuring it. Anyway, then you're looking at performance as well, and what you weigh has nothing to do with your performance. So that's a weird one. But lastly, which is really cool, if you've ever heard of a DEXA scan.
I was like, is she going to bring up the DEXA?
Yes.
Surely.
So dual energy X-ray absorptometry. DEXA. It's got a DEXA scan.
How do you spell the last word?
So absorp, ABSORP, TOIMETRY, which is what I can't get the sound of. Teometry. Absorptiometry?
That sounds nicer. Yeah.
I always thought this was like gold standard. I always called it gold standard. An article I read said it wasn't, but I don't know, whatever.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I always called it the gold standard of body composition.
I would agree.
They're very expensive. They are usually only in research labs. So here in Perth, I know that ECU has a couple. I wouldn't doubt if, what's the other one called? The other university that's...
Curtin.
Yeah, the one in the city. UWA, I kind of don't doubt that they would have one. I've had 2 scans in my life on a DEXA scan because I was part of a study that was looking at muscle mass, right? So my only way I would have ever gotten one was as a voluntary participant in this study. Otherwise, they're a couple $100 to buy a scan of. But they use this dual energy X-ray to actually see bone mass, fat mass, muscle mass, where it's deposited. And it's kind of cool.
So it doesn't rely on like electrical currents, which relies on water. It doesn't rely on like pinching skin and kind of, what's the word, assumptions.
Yes, yeah.
It's literally there.
Yeah, yeah. So it's using X-ray techniques so the light will bounce off differently off different tissue types and that tells us what the tissue type actually is. So they're really cool. If you ever get an opportunity to get one, I would get one because it's just cool as well that you look really funny on the scan.
Yeah, I've gotten one. I'm like, is that me? Like, I saw my little crooked spine laying on the table. I was like, what?
You have to like sit in a really weird position. And then that gives you your values, and then it also places you in the population as far as how lean you are compared to others, how much bone mass you have compared to others. So we're talking like osteoporosis and bone density, really, really good scan. I don't think you can diagnose off anything other than a DEXA scan for osteoporosis. And different things like that. But like not going to get one as a general population person.
In terms of like basing it off the population, those that have gotten DEXAs?
Good point. Probably.
Is it like a comparison of existing data?
Because it's a research tool, I'm sure they have a lot of data. Yes, actually, I'm going to say yes. It's based on real data from DEXA scans, from research data collection, because that's really the only situation and setting they are available in is for research. So that means we can have population norm values because they've been done on a whole range of population. And then that takes into consideration your ethnicity, where you come from in the world, all these other things as well, because
that's cool.
Different parts of the world have different tendencies and body composition.
Yeah.
So another really good thing.
Wow.
So obviously that was all very kind of objective. It's really easy to do a BMI, a waist and hip, and a waist ratio. You can do those with no special tools, and you can use them in conjunction with each other, but only after having a holistic view at your lifestyle and behaviours and mental state. Then use those to kind of be like, where am I at?
Because I kind of feel like if people are concerned about their weight, which is why or their health, which is why you do those measures, I feel like people inherently know things that they should be doing and changing.
So an even cheaper way to measure that is how many vegetables do you eat a day?
That's
how many minutes of activity do you do a day? That costs nothing to reflect on your behaviours. And I do believe that would tell you a lot more than any of this would. Or it would tell you more beneficial information than
more
any of this would.
That you can do about it. This is kind of like, oh, you're this. Now what?
Exactly. Yeah. So like, I'm not eating vegetables. Great. Eat more vegetables. My BMI is high. Is it because of muscle mass? Is it because of fat mass? Is it because I did this? Is it because of this? Is it because I did this? So then you...
Am I pregnant?
So I'm not allowed on the BIA machine because all my amniotic fluid that I'm storing in my belly would just put it all way out and it would have no idea what's going on.
And also the baby probably doesn't want to go through that.
It would be fine. It's not harmful. It's just like that poor little machine can't factor in a whole separate body growing inside of you.
Imagine in the scan report there was like a little pea inside your belly.
It's like weirdly bouncing off electrically off this thing off the middle. Anyway.
Imagination.
Better ways to track progress are keep a journal of how you feel. Keep a journal of how much you're exercising. Take note of how your clothes fit. Take note of your energy levels. Yep. That stuff. Way more.
Progress pictures, some people.
Progress pictures, if you want
them.
Yeah, circumferences aren't bad, so you can measure your arms and your thighs and stuff, but you have to be specific. So a nice way to go is 5 centimeters up from your elbow, measure around your arm so that you know you're going to measure the same spot again. So you have to be really consistent with your spot. So same thing, I think the thing is, if you can't find a very obvious smallest of your waist, then go 3 centimeters above the belly button every single time.
Yeah.
Pick a spot and make sure you're measuring the same spot each time, because that can very easily change. And if you're measuring your arm, are you tensed? Are you not tensed?
That's what I'm thinking. How do you know if circumference is changing? Well, muscle is a denser tissue than fat.
Yes.
But you could be going up in the levels. So some people could correlate that to a bad thing.
So then you have to factor in, what have you been doing? Have you been hitting the bicep curls and tricep extensions, or have you been eating a lot of McDonald's?
Yeah.
You then still need a human person on the other side to
And other measures as well,
yes.
and behaviours.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, not a bad thing to measure circumference, as long as it doesn't make you weird mentally to, like, have those measurements. Some of my clients, I will not show their waist and hip measurements. They're not interested, and I'm using it as a tracker because it's Medicare, which means I need those numbers from a legal perspective.
Yes.
And some people, aren't interested in knowing. But so circumferences are fine. They're really cheap. Make sure you're following the same procedure every single time.
Definitely.
And how tightly are you holding the tape measure around your arm? So because I've done it so often, I've got the same tension, I'd like to believe, every single time I measure it. And I measure it from the right side of the body all the time. And I measure it from, like I have my protocols that I run through to make it as reliable as possible.
Which is very important. Yeah.
Thanks.
She's done. She just did a little spin on her chair. No, I really enjoyed that. Like, I think that's all very important information. And I'm very much for going for the last half of the things first. Like behaviours, journaling, and taking pictures, seeing how your clothes fit. Because I know from personal experience, if I looked at numbers, if numbers what drove me, I would be thinking I was doing bad.
Well, if numbers are what drive you and you jump on the scale and morning and night, you're going to go crazy tracking it because it just changes so much.
And another thing I guess is important to know is that with all of these measurements, they're not an everyday thing. They're not even a weekly thing.
No.
They need to be stretched out.
Or if you are measuring weekly, there is no trend until at least 4 weeks. You need that many measurements to even see a trend. And then it's whether that trend continues, whether it means anything. Going back to pictures, like it's massive on Instagram right now, like lighting plays a huge difference. Are you tensing? Are you tanned? What colours are you wearing? Things like that will make a massive.
Posture?
Yeah, exactly. So consider that in your posture photos as well.
For sure.
Did you just eat pizza and you're bloated?
Are you taking it morning when you haven't?
Yeah. If you're taking objective measures, you need to be as scientific as you can, which means you need to be as specific
Control
and
the variables.
controlled. Yes. You need to then treat it like a science project. Yeah. And control as many variables as you can.
Yeah.
If you're doing objective measurements, which is usually anything to do with numbers.
Yes.
And comparing and stuff like that.
Agreed.
Cool.
Thanks, Shelby.
Of course, you're welcome. Quantitative data is what I was trying to get there. The numbers stuff. Yeah.
Qualitative is more quality.
Yeah. It's more subjective. Yeah.
For sure.
Cool. All right. That's it. Don't use BMI by itself.
Moral of the story. Thank you and good night.